really welcome Alexandra. It's really not easy for her to come up here, and I really thank her for doing this. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everyone. I think I want to start with kind of filling you in on how I got into the school, and take it to when I left and why I left, and what I experienced along the way that I think has value. So, as my dad alluded to, I came here with Bodhananda, who some of you know. Obviously a very influential, charismatic person, and I wanted what he had. I wanted that, and I came here. I had no idea what I was getting into. I left high school. I wanted to be an actress. I left all that behind. I came here in '92, and I was 16, so I couldn't attend an event, especially considering the fact that my father was so vehemently against it. I actually did register for my first beginners in September '92, and was returned that registration saying, hey, we're not dealing with this. Your dad wants to call the FBI. There is no way. And I said, well, I'll get my mom's permission. She's okay. No, it has to be your dad. This is too much, more than we can handle. So my mission became, convincing my dad to let me go, because when I was going to be 18, I was going to go anyway. So he was only going to lose me, push me further away by not giving me that permission to go. I want to go back to the exit counseling that my dad kind of touched on, and Joe Zimhart was there. That occurred in May of '92, so I just moved here, and my dad basically kind of coerced me back under the guise that there was going to be a modeling job. We're going to do a father-daughter, Father's Day spread, whatever it was, and I was going to make some money. I came here with $11 in my pocket. That was appealing. So I came back and found out pretty quickly that there was no modeling job. We went to our beach house in Long Island, and all of a sudden these people turn up, and my mom turns up, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? And at that point, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew I don't want any part of this. Something's wrong. I don't want any part of this. And, I hadn't even been to the school. I hadn't been to the school at that point. What were they wanting? What did they want from me? Why wouldn't they let me go and have my experience? Why did they have to, stifle me and try to, infiltrate my mind and somehow, keep me from doing what I wanted to do? And for me, it was absolutely only about, I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and it was important to me that my parents acknowledged that I was an individual and I could make my own choices, and they needed to respect that. 16 years is old enough to decide you want to do what you want to do. So, anyway, exit counseling, I'm like, I don't want any part of this, run outside the door. I needed some time to think about it. The wheels start turning. What is going on here? And I start to realize, along with calling back home to Yelm, what is this? I'm freaking out. And they're like, do not participate. Whatever you do, do not participate in anything they do. Don't talk to them. Don't look at them. Don't, be in the same room as them. Do not participate in this. This is deprogramming. They're trying to deprogram you. And, don't do it. Joe Zimhart, he was, part of the whole Jeff Knight trial. He's this cult expert. Do not go near them. So I didn't. I was freaked out. I was absolutely not going to be part of it. And except it wasn't that easy, because they did what's called an involuntary exit counseling, where I was not free to go. And I can't even tell you, that was like being violated. Okay, I was absolutely trapped. You know, here are, I don't know, a group of 7 people, some of them my family, who are keeping me in the house, patrolling the perimeter of the house. I've locked myself in a room. I've locked myself in the bathroom. You know, I'm like a caged animal, okay? So, all in all, I ended up agreeing. They wanted me to stay for 3 days and just listen to what these people had to say, let them show me some, you know, videos, show me some materials, and talk to them. There were people who had been in so-called cults and blah, blah, blah. Just listen to them, you know, just let them tell you some stuff, give you some information, other, you know, maybe pieces of the puzzle that you're not aware of relating to RSE and other groups like this. And eventually I agreed to speak to one of them, but I was only going to give them 1 day, and at the end of that day I insisted I had to be allowed to leave. It wasn't Joe I spoke to, it was another guy. Anyway, you know, we watched some videos, and for the most part, I just really didn't want any part of it and didn't want to participate. The day was over. I made it through the day. I held up my part of the bargain. Now I want to leave. Well, now they've hidden my shoes, so I can't go. You know, I'm not going to go out without my shoes. You know, I've got to walk to the frickin' train station, you know, and I've got to go all the way into New York and get back home somehow. You know, I'm just furious, infuriated, I mean raging. You know, they've deceived me, they've tricking me. I mean, am I that stupid? I'm not that stupid. Obviously, you took my shoes. They didn't disappear. So, anyway, I was, you know, so-called free to go, but along the way I kind of tried to run away. My dad, you know, ran after me. Obviously, I wasn't going to outrun him. He's carrying me back, kicking and screaming. I mean, it was just horrendous. And there was nothing really, I can't think of anything that my parents or my dad or anybody could have done to actually push me further toward the school and further away from my family. I mean, there really wasn't much anybody could have done that I can think of. So eventually I got out, you know, eventually I left, went back to New York, and then I'm on the phone trying to work out with Bodhananda and everybody, how the heck do I get back home, you know. Eventually, it turns out I couldn't fly back on the ticket that I had because my dad had canceled it. You know, he bought the thing so he could cancel it. I'm just, you know, absolutely furious. I got back, and, you know, there was the violation of trust with my family that happened through that. So there was no reconciling that for a long time. And for a long time, I was really after getting my dad to admit that that was a real big mistake. That was just wrong. You really shouldn't have done that. You know, it wasn't right. And I was really after an apology, somehow acknowledgement that, you know, that wasn't right. That wasn't the right way to treat me. And, you know, we couldn't meet any common ground there because my dad, you know, I understand it now, was doing the best he can. And, you know, I understand the lengths he went to, even if I don't agree with them. I understand it. Anyway, I ended up staying thereafter another 8 years in the school. The years after the exit counseling were really rocky in my relationship with my dad. I could not trust at all. There was nothing I could trust that he said. And eventually deteriorated to the point that, you know, he kept contacting me. I just didn't want to speak to him. You know, I did not want anything to do with him. I needed to cut him out of my life because he was bringing me down and he was interfering with what I wanted. And it was holding me back. And eventually my dad said to me, wrote me a letter and said, I was 19, and he said, you know, it's obvious you don't want any contact with me, and I'm not going to contact you anymore. And I'm going to leave it in your court when you're ready. You know, you know how to get in touch with me. So I was so overjoyed. I thought, finally, you know, leave me alone. And then it took 3 years for me to have the desire to contact him again, and it came from a kind of an unsuspecting source. Some of you know I had a boyfriend, Jim Capizio. He lost his father tragically, and he said to me, you know, I would do anything to have my father back in my life. And here you are, you have that, and you refuse it. And it stuck. Somehow it hit me. I was like, yeah, I guess, you know, anything could happen, and it's tragic when that happens. So I decided that it was time to just, you know, open that door again. And I was feeling a whole lot more confident in the teachings and what I felt, you know, I gained, and I didn't feel like anybody could shake that from me. So I wasn't so threatened by him in that way. So I felt like it's okay, let's, you know, see where there's something here for sure for me. I need to, you know, get back in touch with him. So that's where the reconnecting started, and like my dad said, it was kind of a reestablishing of trust, and some of it was me trying to convince him of, you know, what I felt, that he would finally see the light, and him still subtly trying to convince me that, you know, maybe this wasn't what I thought it was. And I'll tell you some of the things that we talked about that, although at the time I didn't, you know, agree with or I didn't buy into, but they stuck with me, and they were smart, and they were, you know, critical, but yet I could think about it. You know, he said stuff like, why do you want the ability to, you know, heal your body miraculously like that? You know, why do you want to be able to do these things instantly or whatever? Isn't it miracle enough that, you know, you cut your skin open and within a few days, you know, miraculously it goes back to what it was before? Or you break a bone and it grows back stronger. I mean, isn't this already miraculous what our bodies can do? And it kind of hit me. I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. But, you know, nevertheless, the prospect of cheating death is much more appealing. And so in the meantime, I also met my husband, and it was kind of he hadn't been in the school so long. He'd been maybe for 2 years. And there was a time, like it was in 2000, 2001, when we were living together, and he said, you know, we were coming up on our required retreat, and he said, you know, had no money whatsoever. And he was like, well, what do you think? Like, maybe we not go to the event and, like, pay our rent? You know, what do you think? Is it an idea? I was like, you are crazy. There is no way. I'm not dropping out of school. I've been here for 8 years. I'm not dropping out. You know, no, I'm not doing that, you know. But as I thought about it, it was like, well, we're all about taking responsibility and being impeccable to our responsibilities, and rent is one of those. So, yeah, I guess, you know, it's more important to live the teachings than to be at the event, right? So I said, okay, yeah, I guess rather than add to more credit card debt, yeah, let's do it. We're okay. We'll be okay. You know, we'll survive. And so we missed that retreat, and it was like a weight dropped off my shoulders. I mean, it was like I didn't even think I could feel that free. I was like, oh my God, you know, great. I can actually pay my rent. My bills are paid. I didn't skip out on my work and leave people hanging because I had to be there. You know, I actually felt like I am being what these teachings are about. And, you know, that's how I justified it and made it okay for myself to allow myself to do that. And over time, the more distance I got, the more I started to say, well, you know, I always thought, well, we'll go back to a catch-up event, whatever. And, you know, then as time went on, I thought, you know, I don't know if I'll ever go back. I don't really feel like I need to. I'm really, you know, I feel like I got something, and I'm, you know, happy, and I don't really feel like I need to go back. And then it was like, yeah, I'm never going to go back. But, you know, the whole thing about creation and the 7 levels and, you know, all of that, I believe, is so true. You know, that's totally real. I mean, that's just the way it has to be. It makes so much sense, you know. And then a little bit later, I started thinking, you know, some of that must sound kind of like a crock of, you know, crap. And then as we went on a little bit more, I was like, you know, But Ramtha is real for sure. You know, I mean, maybe Jay-Z's got issues or whatever, or problems with the teachings or whatever. Some of the stuff doesn't make sense, but, you know, Ramtha must be for real. And as time went on, I'm like, you know what? Actually, I don't think so. I think it's a whole bunch of baloney. And it was, for me, that kind of a process over time. It took time to kind of come to that. And I have to say, I guess I should kind of wrap it up. Okay. Yeah, one more thing I want to mention. One of the things that started to get me to wake up, I would say, is 9/11. Okay, we had dropped out. We hadn't gone to our required in the beginning of 2001. So when 9/11 happened, we were already out, had some distance. Okay, I was absolutely shocked. Okay, first of all, shocked at the events. But I was so shocked at the way people reacted in the community. And I kind of saw it from an outside point, you know, the whole, obviously they created it. You know, what did they do to create being in those buildings, being in those planes, you know, they created it. No sense of compassion, no sense of, there was just no sense of realism, really. And I started to realize that part of the reason that people reacted that way, and I could relate to it because I would have reacted that way had I been still in the school very strongly. I would have reacted the same way. And I started to realize one of the reasons people couldn't feel compassion is because it hurt. It hurts when you feel someone else's pain. And when you can put yourself in their place and start to kind of comprehend that depth of suffering or tragedy, and people couldn't do that. And I started to feel like, that's not good. There's something really wrong with that. And I think that may have been what motivated some of these terrorists and what kind of gave them the ability to do what they did. And just these thoughts started coming, and I started to see similarities, and I'm not saying the school is a bunch of terrorists, okay, or potential terrorists. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, these are the thoughts that went through my mind. And then there's what my dad talked about, the whole story of him asking for proof for these miraculous things that had happened. And I mean, I was absolutely convinced these things happened. I mean, they happened. They told us they did. I knew of the woman who regrew her teeth. I mean, these things were for real. And so when he said, the documentation's never going to come, I was like, no way. I knew Dr. Joe. I knew Greg. I'm like, these people need to, we freaking pay their way. They need to do their job and come up with the stuff that, that they've promised. And as time went on, I was like, well, it isn't really ever going to come. And maybe that is because it doesn't exist. Because why else would they not be impeccable to their word and match their actions with their words? And then to top it off, I got a call from Jim Capizio. This was after we'd broken up. And he's like, Alexandra, I'm calling you because Jay-Z's concerned about you. And, there's all this stuff going on. Your dad, he wants to bring the school down. He's, a covert reporter. He's writing a book. He's, doing this stuff to expose the school. And Jay-Z is seriously worried about your safety. And I'm just passing on the message. She wanted me to tell you that. And I just, lost it, laughed. I mean, I was like, I know my dad. I know what's going on here. I know that my dad asked for this documentation, plain and simple. It was said that it existed. He asked them to, provide it, and they didn't. And it was that simple. And I was convinced that Jay-Z needed just to kind of understand what was going on. Maybe she wasn't being told the whole story. That just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I wrote a letter to Jay-Z. I don't know whether she ever got it or not. It really doesn't matter. But the point is that was so ludicrous so utterly and completely ludicrous that I thought, that's kind of suspicious thing to do. I just think that's a bit weird. You know, I don't care. It's a bit weird. Because in another state of mind, I would have bought into that. And it certainly looked like she was trying to get me to buy into it. Okay, so to cap it, I guess I would say that I'm very happy to hear that Joe Zimhart is no longer doing coercive exit counseling because, number one, they're horrible to go through, and number two, they don't really work. Maybe they do for some people. He said they do work for some. So, but, and really, I just want to kind of say that I don't really have a problem with people, what everyone believes in the school or whatever their beliefs are. You know, everyone's free to believe what they want to believe. I don't really think, you know, just because I don't buy into it anymore or at all doesn't really make it, you know, everyone's free to believe what they want to believe. But what I kind of take exception to is the way people behave out of those beliefs. You know, believe whatever the heck you want. But can you find compassion in your heart? Can you actually love? And I'm not talking about like loving someone in your mind because, you know, they're so whatever, but you're sending them love. No, I'm talking about like, you know, getting raw and, you know, real. And I don't see that I haven't seen that from many people when I was in the school, truly. And, you know, my whole experience with Bodhidharma, people might say, well, you know, that was different. You know, that was a cult within a cult, and I would agree probably with that. But, you know, it's not so different for the people who've come with families, or they've come with someone they loved, or, you know, a parent, a child, a sister, a brother. It's not so different. And really, I think we should judge people not on what their beliefs are, because everyone has to be free to believe whatever they want, but rather how they act and how they are and how much of an open mind they have. And even that, no, everyone's free to keep a closed mind. That's fine too. But it's just, you know, how do we relate to each other? Isn't that what really matters? So that's really all I have to say.